Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Antiquarian Booksellers Association of America's California Virtual Book Fair and to this very special program, The Intersection of Artists and Antiquarian Books. My name is Laurel Swan. I'm the proprietor of Swan's Fine Books, a member of the ABAA, and part of the planning committee for this book fair. For those of you who may not be aware, the ABAA was founded in 1949 to promote interest in rare and antiquarian books and in book collecting and to foster collegial relations. We strive to maintain the highest standards in the trade, and all members agree to abide by the ABAA's Code of Ethics. Following this program, we hope you will consider visiting the California Virtual Book Fair at abaa.org/VBF. It is open continuously until 8 p.m. Pacific Time tomorrow, Saturday, March 6th. Just a couple of quick housekeeping issues. We are recording this session and it will be available at a later date on the ABAA's YouTube channel. Also, the session is streaming live on Facebook. If you have questions, we encourage you to move your computer cursor to the bottom of the screen and write your question in the Q&A section. The ABAA's Eloisa Amesqua will help us with those questions at the end of the session. If you would like to share a comment with everyone in attendance, please use the chat function at the bottom of the screen. Now, it is with great pleasure, and it is my distinct honor to introduce to you Peter Koch and Gerald W. Peter Rutledge Koch, known internationally as designer, printer, publisher, artist, and writer, founded Montana Gothic, a journal of poetry, literature, and graphics, and Blackstone Press, a letterpress printing and publishing office in Missoula, Montana in 1974. Moving to San Francisco in 1979, Peter served an apprenticeship with the book designer Adrian Wilson at his renowned press in Tuscany Alley. From 1991 to 2011, Peter taught the hand-printed book in its historical context, a practicum and historical survey of the book as a work of art at the University of California, Berkeley, and at the Bancroft Library. In 2005, Peter, with his wife Susan Filter, created the Codex Foundation to preserve and promote the art of the book and is the founding director of the acclaimed biennial Codex International Book Fair and Symposium. His commissioned books, private press books, artworks, and artist books have been the subject of solo exhibitions at many venues, including the New York Public Library, the San Francisco Public Library, the Missoula Art Museum, the Montana Museum of Art and Culture, Stanford University Library, the Grolier Club, and the Book Club of California. Gerald W. Cloud works closely with Peter as editor at the Codex Foundation. He earned his PhD in literature from the University of Delaware in 2005 and published John Rodker's Ovid Press, A Bibliographical History in 2010. He has served as curator and librarian at Columbia University, UCLA's William Andrews Clark Memorial Library, and the Harry Ransom Center, University of Texas, Austin. He has worked in the antiquarian book trade for James Cummins Bookseller in New York City and has taught descriptive bibliography at California Rare Book School since 2013. Peter and Gerald, welcome, and thank you for joining us today to talk about this fascinating topic. Take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Laurel.
Thanks for inviting us. So I'm going to interview Peter. Actually, it's going to be more like a conversation in which the viewers of this webinar are going to sort of see what Peter and I do for fun when we're not on TV. And so I've got some slides to show of Peter's work and of some other antiquarian books. And really the question that I think one of the reasons that Peter and I like to talk to each other so much is because we're both interested in this idea of where the antiquarian book and the artist book meet. And what happens when they do meet. So I'm going to share my screen and go to the slides. And my first question for you, Peter, as Laurel said in her nice introduction, you've had a really productive career. You've been a teacher, you've been an editor, a publisher, a writer, a book designer, a book artist, an artist. But to me, you seem to refer to yourself and think of yourself as a printer more than any of those things, or maybe all those things make a printer. I mean, what is it about that designation that attracts you the most? Printer.
Yeah, no, I was, well, I was immediately attracted to the fact that Benjamin Franklin was buried under the, of all the things that he'd done in his life, and it just said Benjamin Franklin printer on the headstone, and I thought that was really charming, and I chose the word printer as my descriptor, just for the sheer simplicity of it, to try to go through all the many, I should say, areas of the cultural enterprise that I'm interested in and find myself active in. There's just no moniker for it, and so printer just, and of course, ultimately, when I call myself a printer, I'm really referring to the printer of yore. When the printer was, when people went to the printer, like in the times of the 15th, the 16th, 17th, 18th, even as late as the 19th century, people went to the printer for all of their printing and publishing needs.
Well, what drew you to the printing press as a means of expression?
Well, what drew me was the beauty of the poetry that I saw early on in chapbooks that were printed by people with presses like the one behind me that I'm sitting on that truck, and back in the 1970s and 60s. I saw examples of these finely printed contemporary portrait chapbooks at the bookstore of Peter Howard and Serendipity Books. And I always haunted bookstores, and anytime something of real beauty appeared, I kind of noted it. And then one day I drew the connection, between that printing press and those chapbooks that I was so taken by.
Well, so speaking of your early career, it seems you were interested in two things really strongly: the aesthetic of Gallimard and the Olympia Press, as seen in the examples here. And we've got, if I can make this work, two Blackstone Press books. And you were also very interested in surrealism. And here on the right-hand side of the screen is a collage, original collage that you've done. Can you say something about those two forces that were influencing your earlier interests?
What the image of on the far left of Ponge's poems, I was always struck by the intellectual integrity of the NRF publishers, and I was attracted to their design really right from the very beginning. And so when it came for time for me to design my first book cover, which is there, Born, I would look for models. That's one of the things that I think that I do the most in my design and art career, is I look for models, or I look for images that I steal. I'm really a collagist, and so over here on the right-hand side of the screen, that collage is was meant to. It is meant to illustrate a book. That's a finished artwork, but it really isn't. That's sort of the negative. The finished artwork was printed in the book, The Marvels of Professor Pettigrew. It was never meant to be as crude as that. Were I a collage artist, then it would have been much finer work. It would have looked like, probably like Max Ernst's work, were almost seamless. But this was just meant to be printed right from the very beginning. So the original is the print in the book. I was, the simplicity of design of the, and of course I was attracted to the Traveler's Companion series. I mean, what red-blooded young American wasn't in the 1970s and 60s?
Well, they're great books. They combine, again, the simplicity of the design. Somehow the fact that they're simple seems to draw one more than a kind of a more extravagant design would. But one thing that's interested me about your work, since I first got to know it when I was at the Clark, which has a very near comprehensive collection, or if not comprehensive, of your work. You work in a lot of different genres. I mean, you have books that are like Heraclitus here on the left, which is really like I think of as a typographic book. The Fragments of Parmenides is, I mean, to my thinking, seems more like a fine press book where you've paired it with Richard Wagner's engravings. And then something like the Lost Journals of Sacagawea is like an artist book where you have the physical materials are expressing that which the book expresses also in a kind of both kind of simultaneously conceptual and literal way. And I wondered if you could just say something about how do you choose, how do you determine the genres, since it's such a strong element of your work? How do you determine that aspect of your work? And I mean, we might just, I have a slide of Heraclitus here. Maybe we can start there.
Yeah. Well, you know, the text of a book always, for me, is the decider. I find that the text somehow speaks to me. So when, for instance, when I'm reading the fragments of Heraclitus, which is what you have up on the screen, and what I'm aware of, one, of course, is that there are fragments, and two, I'm having studied philosophy as an undergraduate and continue to read it today. I'm very sensitive to Heraclitus's enterprise, but also after Heraclitus, what we've done with him throughout the centuries. So for instance, in this case, I wanted a Greek typeface that Heraclitus himself could have read. You know, and so all the Greek that most people are familiar with, you know, is not something that was around at the time that Heraclitus was. And I sought all over the world for where I could find this Greek. This happens to be Gil Sand's Greek Light, and the Monotype Corporation had the matrices for it, and I searched all over England, found no one with him, and of all things, I mean, of the strangest of all things, I guess, I found those that Dan Carr at the Golgonooza Press in Ashwelot, New Hampshire, out in the backwoods, really, as far back as you can get out down east, and he had these matrices, and so he was able to cast me the type that I was able to set the book from. So the format of the book comes from the idea that you would take a piece of papyrus and fold it in half and Coptic stitch it up on the spine, and you would have a book. And if you were calling for a copy of Heraclitus's book on nature, let's say, during the days of the Library of Alexandria, and had the papyrus that they would have brought out to you been broken up into book form, then it would have been something like this. So I was referencing the contemporary thought for me, of course, was this translation. The translation is brilliant. It's by Guy Davenport. This is probably the finest English translation of Heraclitus. So all of these elements were speaking to me at once, and I had to come up with a design that you know, incorporated everything from the earliest papyrus, you know, all the way through contemporary Eric Gill's typeface to you know, the whatever.
It's a wonderful book to handle too. When you hold it, it feels the right size. I mean, physically, the book, it's like it's a direct conduit to the content as a physical object, I think. What about a book that's a similar format that does something much different is the Fragments of Parmenides, which here you've collaborated with Richard Wagner and done a more like what we think of as a sort of fine press. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay, so by the time the years had passed since I'd done the Heraclitus, and the Heraclitus' book was a like you say, a typographic book. It was pure typography from one end to the other. By the time I got to the point in my career that I was contemplating making the fragments of Parmenides, I wanted to make a quintessential, I guess is the word, a quintessential livre d'artiste. So the artist is Richard Wagner, and here you see these are all his abstracts relating to the fragments. Yeah, and I knew he was capable of doing this kind of work. Richard and I had worked together already by this time on a major book called Zebra Noise, which had a lot of abstract backgrounds in it, and then I was working with Robert Bringhurst, the poet and translator and typographer, and he has created what I believe to be the absolutely greatest translation. And if we could go back, Gerald, and look at that type, I'd like that. He created the finest translation, again, in English language, of Parmenides. And Parmenides wrote in a poetic form, probably in like the heroic Homeric way, but he was a philosophical poet, like Robert himself is a philosophical poet. So the typefaces in this case, especially the Greek, this was the most important part. You see, I had done the Heraclitus, and I was perfectly willing to do the Greek fragments, to set the Greek fragments in the Gill type. But one day I was in a car with Dan Carr again, and he had just completed an apprenticeship or study session with Christian Papou, the great French punch cutter who worked for the Imprimerie Nationale in Paris, and I said, "Oh, you mean you can cut punches?" And he said, "Oh yeah, now I can cut punches." And I said, "Well, could you cut punches for a new Greek typeface? There's never." And he said, "Oh yeah, I could do that." I'm rising higher and higher in my seat as he's saying this. I'm thinking about a million miles an hour. And all right, I'll just ask out for, what would you charge me to make a complete set of punches and cast the type for the fragments of Parmenides? And he named a sum, and I thought it was reasonable, and I jumped immediately, bouncing around in the front seat of his car. He said, let's do it. So 5 years later, he had completed the task, and we were working on the book. But this Greek, again, is one that we think that Parmenides would have been able to read quite easily. The type form is from extant Greek fragments that are found not only on the pottery, but in inscriptional Greek of the period.
So collaboration sounds like it's a really big part of your work. And this next example that I wanted to look at, or have you tell us about, The Lost Journals of Sacagawea. Again, this for me is more like an artist book that brings these material aspects into it. You've combined typography, photography, poetry, the binding, which we saw in a couple of slides back. You have a kind of buffalo skin binding and bullet casings on the spine, and you worked with Deborah Magpie Erling here on this book. Can you say something both about the importance of collaboration, and again, just keeping with that initial question about how the project demanded to be an artist book as opposed to a typographic book?
Okay. Yeah. Well,
it's 3 questions at once. I don't want you to get too comfortable over there.
Okay. Well, I'll start with the last one. How come it became an artist book rather than a typographic book? Because I could have said to Deborah that I just want to treat your fragmented prose as a typographic challenge, and she was quite excited by the idea. But no, by the time this book came into my life, I was ready, fully ready for to do this and to express the content, through the materials. And once again, to the question of the Antiquarian, I own a copy of the journals of Sacagawea, the journals of Lewis and Clark. I inherited, I should say, a copy of the 1814 edition and the 1817 edition and the English 1814, on and on. I have a lot of Lewis and Clark material, and I was born on Lewis and Clark's trail. My grandfather and great-grandfather were both scholars, amateur scholars of Lewis and Clark. So there was a lot of, and I was born in a library of antiquarian books, you would call it, on the exploration of the West. So this came to me as an opportunity to somehow bring all of that into a different kind of focus. The next step in the Koch family tradition of treating with Lewis and Clark. So I had seen, images of and was familiar with what William Clark's field journals look like. When you see the journals of Lewis and Clark in Philadelphia, the originals, what you see are finely bound books with really good paper, and that was what Lewis and Clark would go home to. Not home. They would go into camp at night and sit around the campfire and write in those journals. But if when they were out in the field in the middle of the day, and they were wearing their buckskins or whatever it was they were wearing, their uniforms, they Clark, for instance, carried a field journal that was wrapped in buckskin, and yeah, it was wrapped. It looked like that slide on the right, except that it was about the size of a 6x9 book, and there was lacings on the end of the flap that were wrapped around it, and it was something he carried in the rain, in the weather, in the snow, and I wanted the Lost Journal of Sacagawea to speak out of that kind of moment. I mean, because, by the way, Sacagawea was a great friend of Clark. Clark really quite liked her so much so that he adopted her son. So the binding references Clark's journals that Sacagawea must have been familiar with, and then of course then adding the photographs to the fragmented prose, as Deborah calls it. She says, by the way, she says, I'm not a poet. She's a novelist, and so what she's written, she said, is fragmented prose. So adding the photographs with something that was due really largely to the medium was due largely to my fascination with contemporary photography, antique, old. These are of course old photographs, but the techniques that we're using to create these photographs that you see here in the book was absolutely at the high end of the digital tradition. These images were printed digitally onto a soft Japanese paper, and then they were treated with multiple layers of chemicals and so forth. I forget, acrylic medium to make it feel like parchment or skin. And the idea was that that these images, you could see the text on the other side. So, I mean, the whole thing was it's a major challenge, and I chose this direction because I had seen beautiful objects that this book, sort of grew out of.
So it's really one of the things that I love about this book is that it is like seeing a relic from the outside. It's the journal that you described, the one like Clark had in his pocket. And then when you open it, you are seeing kind of into the past through the quality of the images seems misty. Again, I was gesturing here with the mouse. For those who maybe didn't notice, you can see the text showing through on this one in the lower left corner. And then the fragmentation of, we don't have all of Sacagawea's words, we have this fragmented kind of text from it. One other book that I can't not talk about is this one, Libra ignis, that seems to bring together a lot of these techniques that you're working with in a really powerful way.
Yeah. This book is, as for those of you who haven't picked it up, it weighs 30 pounds, and the sheet on the right where the photograph is printed directly on a sheet of lead, and you can see some copper tubing in the center, dead center. The copper tubing is what do you call it? Soldered onto the lead sheet, and with holes punched in it. And where the holes are punched into the lead and not the solder, then you can start lacing. And like you see at the bottom of the picture, you can create this sort of web belt or chain link stitch. Created by Jonathan Gherkin, by the way. Thank you a million for designing this amazing binding with me. I did say the book weighs 30 pounds, and I chose that weight because, and so the book only has, as you can see, 6 leaves. And I could have gone further, but I figured that no human librarian could get it off a shelf and easily and bring it to somebody, and so I thought I better leave it at 6 pages. So the book is made. The book is about Butte, Montana, mining. The mine that you see in the upper right is called the Never Sweat. What you're looking at is, quote, the richest hill on earth. And I want you to look down lower in that picture, and you see a woman hanging out her white sheets, and then these children playing in a slag heap. I mean, by the way, this is one of the world's most greatest Superfund sites now. The toxicity of that mine was so great that they had to build a separate town nearby just to house all the dying. By the way, it is euphemistic. It's nicely called Warm Springs, is where they sent the dying. They were not only just injured in the mine, but they were poisoned by all of the gases and by the and by the dust in their lungs and so forth. And what they're mining there is copper. So I had it bound in copper, and that lead is in that hill, and so is gold, and so is silver. So on the cover, on the box that the book lies in, there is gold leaf. There's copper, the copper cover, and what you're looking at in the lower left, I'm sorry, is a Bessemer converter, which is in their smelter in Anaconda. And then right above that, you see the poems written, what he calls them collage poems, by Adam Cornford, an old colleague, friend, buddy of mine that goes back to the early 1970s when we lived in Berkeley together. We were roommates, and he talks about power and light and copper, and our desire and our hunger for copper, and the demand for copper, which of course all of us demand. We wouldn't be doing this if there weren't for lots and lots of copper. But there was a toll to pay, which is like now the world's one of the world's largest Superfund sites. And and of course the laborers were crushed in the process. There they are. I mean, they're proud men. If you go to Butte today and meet, well, not today, but in my childhood, I knew plenty of miners, and I knew their children. Now today were still around, and they were proud men, and the women were all proud as well of their husbands. They were not working in the mines, but they generations. They came over from Europe to work in these mines, and the book is very small run, because of course it takes several months for our people at my studio to bind a single copy. Several months of constant thought. I mean, the books are, the sheets, the lead sheets are prepared chemically, I have to say, with undercoatings Then the lead sheets go to Magnolia Editions to be printed. Then they come back, and each one of the lead sheets is hand painted. Then they are punched, and then they are soldered, and then they are woven, and all of this time. And then we have a copper box to make. I mean, it's a hell of a production, but really, it's an expression of everything that I think about when I think about Butte.
And it's also, to me, what's amazing about your work is this book is very heavy, if you'll allow the pun, but it's also very subtle in the same way that Heraclitus is subtle. We've seen this range from the Heraclitus, which goes from this kind of slim, elegant book with very fine type, all the way to this very heavy kind of maybe too heavy kind of book that's hard to lift off the table, even in lead pages that reflect the crisis that the book is interested in addressing. I mean, for me, one of the books that seems so interesting in this regard of as an object talking about what it is this book, The Typographic Legacy of Aurigi, with hard high country poems included in it. And here, again, you're doing collaborations with Robert Bringhurst, your great friend, but you've also paired it with, you've kind of allowed Michelangelo and Aurigi to collaborate in this book, which this is the slide that all the people that are here for the antiquarian portion of the program will be excited by. Tell us about how you got to this type specimen to make this book.
Okay, yeah, well, all right. So I was fast. I inherited through my mentor and actually my teacher, Adrian Wilson, who taught me book design. I inherited from him this a type, a couple of drawers of this exceedingly rare type called Vicenza and Aurigi, and these and what that particular typeface was designed by Frederick Ward in the early part of the 20th century, and it was just a prototype of a typeface called Aurigi that you can buy today for your computer. Well, his prototype was generated by his interest in this very specimen that you were looking at. So that specimen is what Frederick Ward was copying, more or less, or interpreting, I should say, for his Vicenza. And so when I used that specimen as the covering for my slipcase, but what you see on the left-hand side here is a photograph of the actual type as it's set and turned into something I could print letterpress. So you can see Robert Bringhurst's poem in that is his translation of a sonnet of Michelangelo, and it's in this Aurigi type. Now, the whole genesis of this, and there it is. There's the type itself, this very elegant italic, referencing Aurigi's type and lettering forms. And what happened is that the genesis of this is that I had this type, I had inherited it. I was on the phone with Bringhurst, Robert, one day, and I said, Robert, I've got this magnificent type, you know what I'm talking about, right? And he said, oh yeah. That was, I love that type. He said, you could do a Robert Bridges poem in it or something like that, and that happens to be where this particular typeface first appeared, was in a Robert Bridges poem. I said, I don't want to do Robert Bridges' poem. He says, well, by the way, that Michelangelo and Aurigi probably knew each other, because Aurigi copied a manuscript of Michelangelo's lover, so to speak, or at least his best friend or something. Wouldn't it be interesting to do, by the way, he said, I've just been translating Michelangelo's sonnets, and love sonnets, more or less, and odes to the hard high country stone, and I said, well, let me see the manuscript, and I fell in love with it. It was brilliant, I thought. So we have put the Michelangelo on the left-hand side and his translation on the right. So there we are. I mean, that is, and it is a type specimen from one end to the other. I mean, the whole book it's in 1, 2, 3, 4. Basically, the book is in 4 different forms of Aurigi type, and it includes, or 5 if you include the original, which is on the cover of the box. It also includes 2 versions of Frederick Ward's prototype type, and then it also includes the monotype metal version of his Aurigi that was in commercial, used commercially, and you can buy it today from M&H Type at the in San Francisco. And then it also had a digital version. I used a digital version of it, so I went all the way.
It's a great book. I wanted to try to give you a chance to, now that we've heard from you about these inspirations and these forces that lead you to make books. You've written a lot about what it means to make books, and you've given lectures about what it means to make books and the ideology that's behind it. I feel I'm taking a risk here to ask you to talk about Materialia Lumina because it's a big topic, and I have a few more slides that I want to get you to comment on. But can you put it in a concise form what this manifesto is interested in promoting?
Yeah. This whole idea of the third Materialia Lumina is that the book today has never been more alive, more vital ever than at any time. It's just the things that we can do with type, with digital imagery and so forth. Creates what I call Materialia luminous materials. The idea behind it, goes all the way back to the medieval light metaphysics, which is one of my favorite classes as an undergraduate. It was light metaphysics, and the idea behind the Materialia Lumina really is that there are artists today working that are aware of everything that you see in these cabinet of wonder images that you see on the screen, and at the same time they are pushing the boundaries of what is possible with a book form. That's basically what and I'm trying to lay it out and say in this monograph that that it's a recognizable form and that it emerged more or less in my lifetime.
Well, speaking of luminous things, I picked a few of the books that you've, antiquarian books, earlier books that you've told me that have inspired you and that we can sometimes see reflection of in your work. So to try to work from these influences, and then I'm going to throw up some slides of some contemporaries, some of your contemporaries who are making luminous books. Okay. And I thought I would just give you a chance to say a few things. We'll think of it as a little bit of a word association. Hypnerotomachia.
Okay, well, that leads me directly to Watermark by Joseph Brodsky, which I used this book as the typographic model on which I based my work in Watermark, which we printed in Venice, Italy. I was offered the opportunity through the generosity of my wife's friends in Venice to come to Venice and produce a book, and we chose the book Watermark by Joseph Brodsky, and the illustrations are photogravures, but the typography is directly out of the Hypnerotomachia, which I believe to be, as everyone seems to agree, one of the finest, most beautiful books ever produced. And I adore this book. In fact, if I'm very lucky, I may even own one someday.
Mm-hmm. Cranach Hamlet.
Cranach Hamlet is just, well, what a beautiful book. I mean, I dragged that book out of its lair in the Bancroft Library over my 20-year years of teaching there every single quarter. Anyway, I had it on the table every class, and I love that book. I think this, and it leads me directly to that plus the Nuremberg Chronicle and the Complutensian polyglot leads directly into my current work, which is still in press, which has not been released, but it's called Urtex Volume 2. Yeah, oh, and how the illustration and the beauty of it all. William Everson, Granite and Cypress. Oh, look at him there. Oh, well, anyway, Bill, who I count as one of my friends, he was, one of my elders, but also a friend, set these magnificent poems of Robinson Jeffers in this brilliantly chosen, typeface. And I wanted to print those same poems, plus a number of others that I was editing out of the work of Jeffers that would point it directly to the place called Point Lobos. And so back and in collaboration with the photographer Wolf van den Busche, I created Point Lobos, and it was this book right here you see. And also, I quickly say that the Granite and Cypress printed by Everson also opened the door in 1975, which is when it was published. Really opened the door to the Materialia Lumina in my life.
Parole in Libertà Futurista. You must love this one because you made a facsimile of it in the monograph series.
Yeah. Oh, I just think this is one of the most exemplary of books, where the material that the book is made from, the subject of the book, and the trajectory that the book is meant to hold into the world is all unified. So, I mean, the futurists' love of metal, of machinery, of warfare, of this. And this book, by the way, is metal from one end to the other, and it was printed by this company Lito Lata, who was printing labels. Printing directly on cans for like canned food or whatever, and olive oil cans. And these clever artists said, hey, I can go to this factory, Lito Lata, and I can have them print on tin, but we don't have to package olive oil. We can package the futurists. Oh my God, this is what, then the design, the language, everything is all one. It's a pure third stream, 100% Materialia Lumina.
So I took the liberty of cherry picking some books from our previous conversations that you've mentioned in the past that you really love, and a couple books that you've shown me as well. And so here's a kind of your contemporaries: Didier Mutel, Veronica Shapers, Carol Lee Campbell, Tobias Longa, and Felicia Rice. And again, these books seem to be doing a similar thing that your work does, which is something about the material aspect of them conveys their meaning.
Well, Gerald, I almost want to stop and let you carry the ball here. You're absolutely right. Each example that you've chosen is I think in my opinion, they were some of the most brilliant books produced in the 20th, late 20th and early 21st century. Didier's Jekyll and Hyde is a typographic masterpiece. Oh my God, what an interpretation. What a brilliant interpretation. Here you see the madman breaking out of normal, ordinary text. You see the you see the disruption and of thinking, the spirit of typography and lettering, just diving into the text and coming back up in a new form.
Speaking of diving, here we're way under the sea.
Right, and then of course Veronica's squid book. Now this is a book that is so abstract that it's a book about a giant squid, and there is nary a picture of a squid in it. But on the other hand, it has these brilliant poems in it, I think, by a German poet, Dirk Grunbein, who is fascinated by the sea and things under it. And Veronica, went into the laboratories of the man who first photographed a giant squid and got from him art, the geographical details, and you see that's the title of the book. It's 38 degrees north, 140 degrees, 1.6 east, blah blah blah. That's where that damn squid was.
That's where the squid is.
It clicked the shutter.
Well, speaking of geography, Carol Lee takes us on a trip in this book too.
Yes, this is her Real World of Mano of Cordova, and a long poem by William Merwin. Cordova was like a shaman in the Amazon, and so it's a riverine poem. It's a poem that lives on either side of the river on base. And here she has set the book so magnificently in a way that works beautifully with this river map. And this river map, by the way, in her life is a very personal thing, because it's a river that she has been down a number of times herself, and even soloed in it as the Colorado River. And she and then this paper is to die for. And then when you open the book, as you can see it over here on the left, it's all folded up in its cover. When you open the book and the waterfall of the pages, I mean, it's a tactile masterpiece, and the text, and it's not a frippery. It's direct. The text is about it. It's all one to me.
Yeah, and apologies to the audience that I don't have better images of this, but this is the moment where we recognize that as much as we love the fact that we're able to communicate by Zoom, this has its limitations. Carol Lee's book, when it's actually open, is just spectacular. How about Tobias's Mexico?
Well, yeah, Tobias' work on this book was, he dipped these sheets of very thin Japanese paper into or coated them with photosensitive material, and then he printed these in his darkroom. So these amazing sheets, they're just photographs of in Mexico at a farm owned by evidently a friend of Tobias's. And I was so struck by the transparency and the feel of this book. It's just unusual. I never see anything like it, and I think he was. It's just a brilliant piece, and it deeply influenced the way I illustrate. I worked on the photographs for the Sacagawea book.
How about Felicia's Codex Espanglensis?
Yeah, the Codex Espanglensis. Wow, I don't know what to say about it. It's almost a divine work, a collaboration between three brilliant people: Gomez, Pena, Chagoya, and Felicia. All three together have created this codex, this 21st century or 20th century codex, based on border crossing and politics and Walt Disney and the hell warmed over that we create on our borders. And it's a brilliantly printed letterpress, and referencing an ancient book tradition in the Americas. It's an unparalleled piece of art.
And it's, again, apologies to audience members who haven't seen this book, because this thing, Felicia has photographed herself a little bit like the owner of the Indianapolis Colts had himself photographed with Kerouac's scroll, if anybody saw that. The thing opens all the way up and tells this narrative. Now, so to me, it's so exciting how you combine these antiquarian books and artist books in your own production. So we've seen the antiquarian books that you're inspired by. We've seen your contemporaries, works that inspire you. And to me, it seems like it really comes together in this work that you call the Urtex. And here are the volumes 1 and 3. Volume 2 is forthcoming this year. And I think that it combines so many of these elements that I really wanted for you to have a chance. I know we're getting towards the end, moderator, but I wanted Peter to have a chance to talk about this book, Urtex Volume 2, and say some of the things that you've brought to this, because to me it seems like you know, you've refined a lot of these elements of that you bring to bookmaking, and they're really blossoming beautifully in this book.
Well, yes, thank you. You know, this book is my own version of many of the most vital texts that have ever affected me. Everything from the Bible. This is a copy of the book of Genesis. It goes from page 1 to the final page. In the beginning, in principio creavit Deus caelum et terram. You have it in Hebrew on the left, and you have it in Greek on the right. This Greek typeface by Christopher Steinauer. It was made just for us, for me. You have on the outermost columns, you see the scholia, and beneath is the subtext. And the subtext is the biological effects of nuclear weapons, in which all hell breaks loose, to put it mildly. And yeah, it's a medieval manuscript. It's a 15th century book. It's a 20th late, you know, it's a late 20th century manual on nuclear weapons, right there. And it's the Nuremberg Chronicle. It's particle physics. It's poetry. It brings together just about everything I've ever loved and written in a form. I mean, it's sort of my personal Finnegan's Wake, I guess.
Only comprehensible.
Yeah, I hope it's comprehensible. Yes, it reaches from the Butte Pit in like Libra Ignis to you know, the Tower of Babel, and you know, one of my favorite paintings on earth. It touches everything, from nuclear weapons, like I said, from nuclear mining, magic,
typography
in the extreme. Yes, absolutely. Incipit. It's my Ecclesiastes, really. It's my I don't know, my metaphysic. That's how we're doing, Laurel.
Well, you know, this is an absolutely incredible discussion. I hate to even think about bringing it to a close, but we probably should allow a few moments for questions. While people have a chance to type some in, I think we might have one or two that Eloisa will ask us in a moment. But Peter, I had one, and I think it might be interesting to the rest of the audience. Your work is such a part of a long-term tradition. It goes way, way back. Is there a way to identify or choose what might have been the first or the earliest artist book?
Oh, well, that's a question I really avoid at all costs. If you want to volunteer one, you're more than welcome. If it doesn't go back to the caves of Altura, then or a manuscript by an early Christian or maybe a Buddhist, where does it start?
Yeah, good question. Eloisa, did you say we had some type questions?
Yeah, there's one really great one. In our increasing and I think this is a good question too for the intersection of antiquarian books and artist books. In our increasingly digital age, how do you negotiate your book art's work, and what keeps you going?
Well, you have a fine example of it right in front of you. Everything, these illustrations, this is on a sheet of handmade paper. It's a vintage about a 1960s or 50s paper from the Fabriano mill that's no longer made, and the images are printed on an Epson printer in my office. That's pretty digital. That's pretty up to date. I negotiated because I want to use the best imagery and the best work that I can possibly lay my hands on. Now, if I want to work with pure metal and sort of reference the 19th century finest or 20th century finest type foundries, I will. But if I want to use a digital typeface created digitally, born digitally, this book has it.
And this book is sandwiched too between these two volumes.
Exactly, exactly. This is the sacred word, by the way. That words over on the left, set in a Bible Gothic sort of type. That happens to have been set at the Mackenzie Harris Type Foundry back in the 1990s, and bound in vellum. And the one on the right, is the text. If you could open it up, would be in Remington typewriter. And that's just about modern, but not quite. But but that bookbinding it was invented, by the way, for more or less for this very book by the brilliant bookbinder Daniel Kelm.
Wonderful. And I think we'll end on one question. If you could talk a little bit about collaboration, so the poets and writers that you come to work with, and how you find them, or if they find you.
Well, yeah. Well, basically, I've never operated with artists finding me or poets finding me. I always find them. I'm not interested in anybody's work, but more or less my own. I'm not a publisher in that classical sense that I'm out to make a buck off of the guy that walks in the door with a brilliant manuscript. What I'm or a saleable manuscript. I'm collaborating with my wife, for instance. You see her on the left. In Paris, it's a collaboration, based on love. And if I love the work of the artist then I might invite them to work with me. If I love the work of the writer, in the case of Deborah Magpie Erling's work, I mean, I just think that she's one of the most brilliant writers I've ever met. And we formed a friendship based on her writing, and then I proposed the book.
Wonderful. Well, I think we're at the end of our time together. Peter and Gerald, thank you again both so very, very much for joining us this evening. It was absolutely wonderful. Thank you for your time and sharing your stories with us. Thanks to all who attended. We hope you enjoyed the session on the intersection of artists and antiquarian books. Please join us tomorrow. Our first session on Saturday is California Calls You, a guided tour of the important books and unique ephemera highlighting the Golden State. It will be a virtual tour with Gary Kuritz, Teresa Salazar, and Brad and Jen Johnson. The tour begins at 11 a.m. Pacific time, 2 o'clock Eastern. Remember, the fair is open until 8 o'clock Pacific time tomorrow night. Thank you again, everyone, and have a great evening. Good night, all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Gerald. Thank you, Elisa.